So, welcome to the webinar. My name's Rolfe, and this webinar is how to get the mentoring message across. And we'll be talking about who you need to communicate and why, what messages need to be communicated, and how to ensure that the right messages are received. And this is information that's vital to your program's success. For those of you who don't know me, I have a background in adult learning and career counselling and professional development. I've been in business for 30 years, and over the last 2 decades I've specialised in mentoring programs. I've spoken on mentoring in Australia, Canada, China, Singapore, the Philippines and USA. And these webinars are attended by people in all parts of the world. I speak mainly from a corporate perspective, but I've worked with not-for-profit organisations, educational institutions, government agencies and community groups. So the content is applicable in all those places as well. So it is vital that every mentoring program has a communication plan, because people can't support what they don't know about. And in organisations, I've actually seen some groups actively resist or undermine mentoring efforts because they didn't see their value. So let's first think about who do you need to get your message to? And they probably fall into one of these 4 main groups: decision makers within your organisation, the potential mentors and mentorees, managers and supervisors, and others not directly involved in your mentoring program. So let's take a look at why you need each group on board with your mentoring program. So decision makers, they can make or break your program, obviously. They usually hold the purse strings, and they have many priorities and often conflicting ones. So you need them to support your program both financially and operationally. Then, of course, you can't have a mentoring program without willing mentors and mentorees. And I've talked in depth about recruiting them in a previous webinar. So today we'll be looking just at the high-level messages and the methods for communicating with them today. The third group is one that's often forgotten, and you can't afford to ignore them if you're running an in-house mentoring program. And it's these middle managers and supervisors. So you need to get them on board with why mentoring is important, because I've actually seen mid-level managers derail mentoring programs. They can make it very difficult for participants to attend activities or be involved if they don't understand and support your program. And then finally, give some thought to non-participants, so other people in the organisation, because if they're disgruntled, that could be a problem for you too. So you need to spread your message to throughout the organisation. And we want to get our message to each of these groups because we want their buy-in. We want each of these groups to support mentoring in different ways. So I'm going to launch another poll here. And I believe these are the 4 main groups that are important. There could be others. And I'm wondering to you, which one of these is the one you most need to get your mentoring message across to? Or is there another group that you need to communicate with? I didn't put other as an option on the poll, but if your group, that's your priority, is not amongst these 4, then you can type that into the question box. Okay, so seeing those votes coming in, about halfway there. Which one, they're all important, but which one's your priority at the moment? Okay, almost all the votes in. Okay, I think that will do us. So closing that poll. sharing the results with you. Okay, so good. So we've got 30% saying decision makers. So I'm guessing that many of you were actually already running your program. So probably you've got those decision makers on board. They've funded or supported in some substantial way your program. The vast majority saying the potential mentors and mentorees. Okay, that's good because a lot of the things I'm going to talk about will be very much applicable to them. So no one's saying those managers and supervisors. I'm hoping that is because you actually have their support, or maybe that's not applicable in your situation. And some of you recognising, 10% recognising that there are others not directly involved that you nevertheless need to have on board. So let's take this a step further. Now, I did provide a worksheet for this webinar, and you can download that, but it's a simple template, and you can easily draw it up, and I'll show you how to do that very shortly. But the template is actually based on, it's a tool that was inspired by a quote from Rudyard Kipling. Now, some of you may know Rudyard Kipling was a journalist and a powerhouse of writing some way back. And his quote is actually the basis, a foundation for journalists. And it goes like this. I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I know. Their names are what and why and when and how and where and who. So this is actually used in journalism courses and as a way to frame up messages, and I've used it in my template. So if you have this template, we're going to fill it in as we go along. If not, just grab your sheet of paper and draw it up for yourself now. I do recommend that I'm going to talk in relatively general terms, and what you do is take this away and then make it much more specific. I recommend that after today you actually get hold of a whiteboard and draw up this grid. Get some of your colleagues that are involved in your mentoring program and actually brainstorm your specific answers to these questions as we go through. So I'm going to talk about, I've actually started to talk about who in terms of those 4 main groups. So if you've drawn up this grid for yourself, or you have the handout, you can fill it in now with these 4 main groups, at least to start with. You might add other groups relevant to your program later on. So we've got the decision makers, the participants, managers, non-participants. I've already touched on why. So why do you need to communicate with them from your point of view? Why do you need them on board? And we talked about the decision makers who you need to probably fund and support in other ways, operationally as well as in practical ways. That you need their backing to get your program off the ground. Your participants, your mentors, mentorees, you want to attract them to your program. Then the managers and supervisors, again, you need their support, particularly in an organisation where they supervise or manage the participants that you're looking for, and they can make it difficult if we don't have their support. And then people who are not directly involved in the mentoring program, who you want to understand so they too can support. So one of the things about getting a mentoring message across is that we have to speak the language of our audience. And some of you may have seen this idea before. It's as if we're listening, we're all tuned in to our personal radio station, WIIFM. And if you know what that stands for, you can type that in quickly. But basically what it means is that each of us, for survival basically, is hardwired for self-interest. So I'm just looking to see, yeah, someone's got that. It's a radio station, WIIFM, stands for What's in It for Me. And to get your message across, you're going to need to speak to people and give them good reasons to listen to you. And their reasons for supporting mentoring or being involved with mentoring will be different for each of those 4 groups and potentially for other groups that you want to communicate with. So you need to give good reasons that they should listen to you. And I suggest that you actually find out what they want, what they need, and what they worry about. And if you really want to communicate with anyone, you can't assume you know what's of interest to them. You can't assume you know what's on their mind and worrying them or what they need or want. You're going to have to ask them. You're going to have to find out for them. And this takes us into the 3rd column of our grid, because we're going to look at what messages you need to get across. And as I said, the what you want to get across will vary according to your audience. But the distinction I want to make here is that we need to look at mentoring from their point of view. Now, I often say on webinars like this, you and I, we're preaching to the converted. You wouldn't be here unless you were convinced of the benefits of mentoring. But there are other people out there, our potential audience, who aren't as enthusiastic about mentoring or convinced about mentoring as we may be. Perhaps they don't know as much about it. So we need to, and they also have a lot of other priorities. So we need to turn it around. We need to step in their shoes and look at mentoring from their point of view, given their priorities and their circumstances. So once we can take their point of view, then we can start to think about, okay, how can mentoring make a positive difference for them? And you'll need to come back and give this a lot of thought as you plan your communication, because this is really what determines what messages you need to get across to each of these groups. And that's why I suggest drawing the grid up on a whiteboard, getting your colleagues, your peers, your reference group, your planning team together, and really analysing and brainstorming and thinking about these different groups, what their wants, what their needs are, what's going on for them, what their worries and concerns are, and how you can link mentoring to their enlightened self-interest. So in terms of speaking more generally, the sorts of messages we need to get across to those decision makers, and some of you said that, in fact, 30% of you said that this was your target, your high priority group. So what we need to get across to them is the strategic value of mentoring, what it can contribute to achieve corporate objectives. Now, I say corporate objectives, but you might be in an educational institution, you might be in a not-for-profit or some other sort of organisation, rather than defining yourself as corporate. Nevertheless, you still need to demonstrate strategic value. Why? From an organisational perspective. From what the organisation's objectives are, what the organisation's mission actually is, what is its purpose, how does mentoring sit with that, how does it further and add value to that. And indeed, again, whether you're in a not-for-profit, a financial educational institution or some sort of corporate, you will still need to make the equivalent of the business case for mentoring. And again, this is something I've treated specifically in an earlier webinar. So you'll need to develop this business case, develop the strategic value, and you'll need to communicate and keep communicating to decision makers. This isn't a one-off thing that you do. It's something that you really need to keep the message going out there. You need to be able to demonstrate how mentoring adds value, because adding value is what these people are responsible for. Your decision makers, your senior executive, and your managers. Their job is all about adding value to the organisation. And you'll need to find convincing arguments. You'll need to go and research and find facts. that you can actually present. For example, a piece I wrote recently, and you might have seen it in my newsletter, was called How Mentoring Women Benefits Us All. And in that article, it was actually making the case for mentoring women in science, technology, engineering, and maths, or STEM. And it included facts that I gained from a PricewaterhouseCoopers report that stated that 44% of jobs are at risk from digital disruption. This same report also said that 75% of the fastest growing occupations now require those STEM skills, and that shifting just 1% of the Australian workforce into STEM roles would add 57.4 billion to Australian GDP over 20 years. So that's just an example of making the case of how mentoring could add value. In this case, I'm trying to make the argument that mentoring women isn't just about women. It's about the Australian economy. It's about benefiting society as well as individuals. So think about your program and what its value is and what the needs for it are and what facts you can glean. Now, if you've got questions or comments, feel free to type them in. I'll be pausing shortly to take a look at those. So you need to go out and collect your facts to support the business case for your mentoring, and then connect the messages that you're sending out to what's topical and important to recipients. So again, thinking from their point of view. So I'm going to pause now for any questions, comments, observations, your examples perhaps. Feel free to put your hand up if you have a microphone and you want to speak to us all, or you can type in your comment, question, or observation. Okay, just taking a look for those now. Don't see any at the moment. Okay, feel free if you're still typing, and I'll pause again shortly. So we're talking about what message do you want to get across, what messages, tailoring it to the specific group. We're in the third column of our grid here. So we're now going to go on and look at, so what messages do we need to get out there to potential mentors and mentorees? So this is the group that you want to attract to the program. So obviously you're going to be talking about the benefits mentoring brings for individuals. And more we want to tell people how mentoring helps people grow personally and professionally. So often a mentoring program is about professional development or career development, but I find that mentoring also develops people at a personal level as well. What isn't so much talked about, but is becoming increasingly recognised, is that mentors get as much out of mentoring as do people who are mentored. Now, we need to be careful here. There's a bit of a paradox because most mentors volunteer for altruistic reasons, and you want to recognise and acknowledge them for that, but don't ignore the value to them as you're thinking about what messages you want to get across. So talking about their benefits in terms of their own professional and personal development. I'll give you an example of that shortly. The other thing you need to do is to educate people in terms of what mentoring is and indeed what it isn't. So you want your participants or potential mentors and mentorees to make informed decisions about getting involved so they know what they're signing up for. I'm just seeing a comment coming in. Okay, this is from Liesl. Thanks, Liesl. Liesl is saying mentorees sometimes have unrealistic expectations of mentoring and their mentors involved. How do we communicate this in a way that still promotes participation? Okay, so I think that thanks for that question. It's a good one, Liesl. So this is why we need to start right from the early days of announcing the mentoring program. In fact, even before we launch our program, we have kind of a program, a marketing program, you might say, where we're promoting the mentoring. And this is where we need to make sure that we're giving out these realistic expectations, talking about what mentoring is, what it isn't, what it can do, what it can't do. I think one of the other things is, Liesl, typically we invite mentorees to fill out some sort of application form, an expression of interest, and you can ask them as part of that to indicate what are they expecting, what is it they're looking for, and then you have the opportunity to go back to them and just let them know and clarify if their expectations are unrealistic. But I like to prepare an information kit that people can access before they sign up or put in an application or an expression of interest. So in that kit, you would have role descriptions, you would have the aims and objectives of your program, so what you're trying to do, and you get into some of this, what's realistic and what's unrealistic to expect as part of the detail there. So I think an information kit is the way to go with that describes your program and what people can expect from it. So thanks for that question. Please feel free if you've got another question or comment or want to share something you've done in this area that will help out your colleagues on the online today. Okay, so we want to also educate those non-participants, and this is what I was saying earlier. Sometimes if they're a bit disgruntled, or why is this person getting this, or why is that person, why can't I apply for this, why is it for this select group? You need to, again, have thought this through and have some good reasons why you are targeting, if indeed you are targeting a specific group. So you sort of need to almost justify why it is a particular group. And I would suggest to you that you also have up your sleeve some alternative development opportunities that you can point other people to. So if they're not within your target group, what other development opportunities are there for them? And maybe encourage them and perhaps even have some resources for them. Okay, they can't be in the program, but there's nothing to stop them seeking informal mentoring out for themselves. So if you have some resources, you might have some written information or some of the other resources we'll talk about shortly that you're making available to people in your program, it probably is not very difficult and no more expensive, particularly if they're online resources, to make some of those available to non-participants, so that at least if they want to take the initiative and go and find themselves a mentor outside of the program, they can actually do that. Of course, you can do things like wait list. So if you've got a specific number of people in your program and they're within the target group but you're full, then you can always put them on a wait list, or again give them additional resources. So just checking the comments coming in. Thanks, Liesl, you're welcome. Okay, so just pausing again to see if there are any questions coming in. You can type them in at any time. Okay, just checking, not seeing any coming in. Let's continue on then. So just in summary, we've now got 3 columns of our grid, our matrix here filled out. And again, this is an example so that you can take this away and put it on a whiteboard and fill out the boxes according to your specific program. Okay, seeing a question here. Teresa is asking, how can you incorporate transformational management with a mentoring program? Okay, so I'm not quite sure how you're defining transformational management. Is it from the point of view of the manager transforming, or is it transforming the organisation? But either way, one of the things that transforms people is their ability to reflect on their experience and gain insight, draw conclusions, explore what's going on for them as a result of that reflection, and consider different ways of applying that insight and what actions they should take. So mentoring is an ideal vehicle for people to have these sorts of conversations that encourage people to reflect on what they're doing now, how that is or is not working out for them, thinking about how they envisage the future, the mission of the organisation, their personal vision for the future, their goals, their aspirations, and thinking about where they are now and where they want to be in the future. Having a conversation that enlightens that and looks at their values and their motivation and their interests. And then from that conversation, starting to figure out possible strategies or actions that will get them from where they are to where they want to be. Now, if we're talking about a transformational management from an organisational perspective, then the vision and the mission of the organisation and how you want to transform that organisation is what needs to feed into those conversations. If it's more from the personal perspective, then you'll need to have people doing some work from a more personal level at the individual. I hope that helps, Teresa. Thanks for that question. Keep them coming in. So we've got our first three columns. So the next two are when and where. And I suppose the experts on getting messages across are really advertising people and marketing people. And I remember hearing an expert talk about radio advertising one time, and he said, when people are sick of hearing your ad, when you are sick of hearing your organisation's ad on the radio, that's about when it's cutting through to your target audience. And my message to you is that that means that you really need to communicate. This is not a one-off thing. You can't send out an email to launch your program and wait for people to respond to that. You need to communicate many times in many different ways or using many different media. And in fact, so the answer to when is as often as possible without driving people nuts. And you'll find you're probably a bit worried about, am I overdoing it? And when you start to get worried about overdoing it, chances are you're getting cut through then. You're actually getting through the clutter of our inboxes. You're getting through the clutter of other messages and getting to the audience. And in fact, you remember that communication, I'm kind of inferring, I guess, that this is one way. But in actual fact, I'd like to recommend to you that your communication needs to be two-way. And I'd also suggest to you that, and I've already mentioned, you need to start communicating with all of your target groups well before your program starts. You need to keep that communication up during the program. So don't take your foot off the accelerator just because you've launched the program and got people involved. Keep it up. It's a slightly different type of communication then, as you'll see. And even after the program, you want to keep that communication going, because after all, we want mentoring programs not to be a one-off, but to actually be an ongoing strategy. And in fact, I'm going to show you, and this will be a bit busy depending on the size of your screen right now. Don't worry about not being able to see the detail of this as it comes up on your screen. I'm showing you a timeline sample of a communication strategy I worked out with a client some time back. And it actually went, if you can see the detail, this was actually a 2-year plan, and it started well before the launch of a particular program. Now, don't worry about the detail. The big picture is what I want you to get here. And down the left-hand side, we actually identified, 6 different, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different 7 different groups that we needed to communicate to. And also we've colour-coded those different forms of communication, or the medium, if you like. There was face-to-face communication, written communication, so documents, email, things that we emailed out to people. I've made a distinction because there was also an emailed newsletter that went out to the staff, and then there was online resources. So we had all these different forms, and we had a continuous program over the 3 years of this timeline. So you can see it's all mapped out there. So just going to pause again for questions or comments, and I'm just going to try and do something about the background noise that is distracting me a little bit. So I'm just going to pause for a second, type in your questions and comments so far. Okay, just looking for questions and comments coming in. Okay, so we're moving towards the final column of our grid, which is the how. So getting on to the how-tos, and I'll give you some specific examples in just a moment. But again, borrowing from advertising, I guess we all know that the best form of advertising is word of mouth. So first and foremost, it's down to you. You need to talk to people. You may be able to get some champions and advocates that will speak on your behalf to promote your program. And you may also be able to find some external voices of authority. So, and what I mean by that is you need to be able to quote some credible sources. And I'll give you an example. Sometime back, I ran a workshop at for mentors in a scientific facility. Now, the program was introduced by the organisational development manager. So we had quite a senior person actually open that workshop. And she talked about how mentoring was being used to change the culture and shift people development from its exclusive emphasis on education to include engagement and experience. Now, she took questions, and one of the questions was, how are very senior people who are going to be the mentors going to find time to mentor other people? And her response to that was to talk about a conference she'd attended and to quote Steve Sargent, who was the CEO of GE Australia. And he'd spoken at this conference, and she'd actually asked him about Jack Welch's comments in his book about, he talked about the amount of time that he spent devoted to mentoring in GE. And she asked if during a time of high pressure times, these tough times that we're in these days, she asked Steve if how much time was actually still being spent on mentoring. And Steve said that his job was largely, so here's the CEO of GE Australia responding that his job was largely about mentoring others in the company. And he said, in tough times, he spent more time. In fact, he quoted about 40% of his time mentoring others. And he said in good times, he only spent about 20 to 30% of his time mentoring. Now, at this point, the chief financial officer of the organisation I was working in, who was a champion of the program, added his view, and he supported the idea that mentoring was not just a high priority but a necessity for senior people for their own benefit. So what we had here, and I was really fortunate, that's why I remember it so well, at the opening of this workshop, we had 4 voices of authority quoted. So I had the organisational development manager, I had the chief financial officer within the organisations championing mentoring, speaking up for it. And then we had those external voices of authority. So Steve Sargent, the CEO of GE Australia, and then Jack Welch, who was the CEO and had written that book that was quoted from. So it's really important to find those voices of authority that will work in your context. On top of that, I believe that you need to build your own authority. Make your opinion respected. And you do this by speaking and writing and contributing, not only within your own organisation, but in your industry and your community. Build your expertise, learn from others, and share what you know. So when you go to conferences, bring back from that useful stuff that you share with other people in your organisation. Write in your staff newsletter. Write in your industry magazine and newsletter. Build your own authority. Speak at local events. Speak in your community. Speak in your organisational events. Put your hand up for committees where you can build your own authority and influence, so that when you speak on mentoring, don't restrict this just for mentoring. You don't have to be a one-trick pony. What you can be is an authority on people development, an authority on your industry, an authority on leadership and management, an authority on things that are relevant and interesting to you and to your context, your organisation, so that you become well known as a person of substance. Just keep those questions coming in because I'm going to start to give you some specifics right now. So here is a list of ways that you can communicate before, during and after your program. So first, you need to promote the needs and the benefits. So the needs of your organisation and individuals for mentoring, and the benefits, the value that it adds. I've got a list of 11 things there. There's probably more. What I'm going to do is invite you to type in the number of something that interests you. I won't necessarily talk about each and every one of these. Some of them I've already touched on, but if there's something there, some of them are kind of self-explanatory, but if there are some things you want to know more about, please type in the number and I'll respond. So promoting the needs and benefits. I mentioned that you need to keep up the conversation, the communication during your mentoring program. And there's another 5 or 6 things that you can do to keep that message, those messages going out. And it's really important that you maintain the communication. You don't take your foot off the accelerator once the program has started. You don't want people to feel isolated. And then towards the end, or at the end or shortly after, there are some more things you want to do, a lot around evaluation and sharing the results. So go ahead and type in the number of anything that you would like to know some more about. Okay, so Maria is saying number 1. So personal communication. So this is where you, your champions or advocates are communicating personally. So you're kind of an ambassador for mentoring. You might speak at meetings, management meetings. You might personally get up and speak at other events. You might go directly to people and have one-on-one conversations. You might sit down with individual managers, sit down with your CEO, go visit a community, and you personally speak. So you are armed with your facts. Preferably, the more senior people you're speaking to, the more you need numbers. So percentages, dollar figures, such as the ones I quoted earlier in my example of what mentoring benefits all of us. Mentoring women, rather, in STEM. So you personally getting that message out might be face-to-face, or it might be in other means. I guess running a webinar for your staff, where you're sitting, where I'm sitting, and broadcasting to other people would be an example of personal communication. Okay, having your champions and advocates also is terrific, because they have their own networks of influence within and perhaps outside of your organisation. So say you are a university, for example, and I know a lot of universities use their alumni for mentoring students. So you might go and talk to the Alumni Association. You, from that, generate some champions for the program, who then go out back into their employer organisations, back into their industry associations, back into their own personal networks, and they personally communicate the message. Now, if that's going to be the case, and I talked about information kits earlier, you want to have a kit of information that you can give those champions, so they've got all the facts and the messages that you want to get across. They've got accurate information. So thanks, Maria. Okay, Liesel's looking at 6, 14, 17 and 18. So Liesel, we'll go to number 6. So information kits. So an information kit would be a bunch of documents that you have put together in the planning phase. So before you launch your program, you have an information kit ready, so that potential mentors, potential mentorees, and anyone else who's interested can access that information before they sign up or put in an application or an expression of interest. The information kit would typically include, first and foremost, a description of the aims and objectives of your program, the purpose of the program, what you're trying to achieve through mentoring, and why that's important to the target group. You then have a description of the mentor role. So what do they do in the context of your program? What is the mentor's role? What is expected of them? You then have a description of your mentorees. So what is your target group? You then have some guidelines, a description of how the program, so you might have a program of events that's going to occur over the life of your program, a description of those, any other details people need to make an informed decision about whether or not to be involved in this program. So you want to keep it fairly brief. It's overview stuff, but enough detail that people can make a decision. Typically, it's a written document. You might distribute it in hard copy, but most often these days it's uploaded somewhere where people can download it. You also want to keep a track, if you can, about who downloads that or who wants that information, so that you can then personally follow up that person and have a conversation with them if it's not a huge program, or at least follow them up by email or phone or whatever way you're going to follow up to to see what their response is. Okay, Liesl, I know you picked some other ones, but I'm going to go to some different ones and then I'll come back to yours. Okay, Christine is asking for number 15. So number 15 is an e-course. Now, I do a lot of e-courses. E-course stands for email course. So these days you can use technology to set up a series of automated emails. so that basically you write a series of emails. You put them into your automated program. I use MailChimp, for example, but there are others. MailChimp lets me write my emails, put them in, and schedule when I want those to go out. You then can collect the first name and the email address of people, upload that, and they will automatically get the series of emails. So an e-course would be a series of emails. My ones are usually linked. Now, they might be just a simple message that you want to different messages at different times. For example, the mentoring tips, which I've mentioned somewhere else, which are just simply one-page short articles that go out to mentors. I would set this up as an e-course so I don't have to be sitting here and emailing a whole bunch of people every week or every month. I set that up as an automated system. But it could be a lot of my e-courses are actually linked to online resources. So they might get an email that gives them a little bit of information. Okay, you should be up to this stage right now with your mentoring relationship. Go and watch this short video that gives you some ideas about how to go about that, or something else that's online and resources for them. So an e-course is a series of emails delivered at a weekly, every second week, every month, whatever period frequency you choose, that delivers chunks of information. It's kind of a drip feed of information over a period of time. Okay, so I'm also seeing number 14. Okay, so number 14, mentoring tips. I have written a whole series. In fact, I've got 48 mentoring tips. These are short one-page articles designed to go to mentors. You can send them to mentorees as well. But this, again, it's linked to the e-course. They're sent out at a regular interval. So it might be weekly, it might be every second week, or it might be monthly. There's 48 of them, so you could send one a week for nearly a year. Or you could send, 12 over a 12-month period if you wanted to do that. So it's a way of delivering a reminder to mentors, just something to stimulate their interest and giving them practical support. Okay, I'm also seeing number 17. So 17 is meetups. So ideally, if you can get your group together on a regular basis, this helps to keep the energy levels, the engagement, the involvement of people. Now, you can have meetups or meetings or workshops, and these are, just a kind of a shade difference. So a meetup would be perhaps something that's run by the participants themselves. It's a kind of a networking event where they get together. A meeting might be something that's more formalised with either a chair or a facilitator. You might run those for them, or indeed you could run a series of follow-up workshops. And then I'm seeing number 18, so review sessions. I like to run review sessions midway through a mentoring program. So if it's a 12-month program, I like to run a review session at 6 months if I can get everyone back together. It's a great way of re-energizing, checking how people are doing, reinforcing the good stuff that the results that people are getting, and also giving a bit of a lift to people who might not be going so well, people who have struck obstacles. And typically the midpoint review I facilitate in such a way that I draw people out. I get them to talk about the challenges they're facing. I get participants to talk about how they have overcome this obstacle or challenge themselves, the sorts of things that they're doing that work really well for them, so that it's kind of peer learning. It's not just me saying what they should do. They're hearing it from their peers, and we know that this is a more effective way of learning. It motivates them. and is really very useful. Also, by doing this halfway through the program, if people have got a bit off track, it's not too late to salvage that and get them on track and geared up to make the most of the rest of the program. Okay, so Cheryl is asking, do you see value in regular surveys to evaluate the effectiveness of mentoring programs? I do, but do you know, Cheryl, people are kind of overloaded with surveys. I don't know about you, but I get, a dozen different surveys a month. Wouldn't be a great exaggeration. And frequently I don't respond to them. In fact, I have gone back to paper survey questionnaires at the end of mentoring programs where I get to do a review session at the end. I literally hand out a paper questionnaire that people are required to fill out before they leave that session, because that way I get a reasonable, I get virtually 100% response from those who attend that review session. It's obviously not 100%. It's only 100% of those who attend, but it gives you much more validity in the conclusions you're drawing from that evaluation. Because what I found, obviously, I went to electronic surveys, and people send out SurveyMonkey and other electronic surveys, which are fantastic, but your response rate can be rather small. And so the problem with that is you are drawing conclusions from a very small sample. So there is definitely value, but only if you can get people to respond. And I'm sure, like me, those surveys that you so often get, they usually come with some enticement, fill in this survey for a chance to win $1,000 shopping spree at your local shopping centre, or fill out this survey for a chance to win an iPad or something like that. So you sort of have to incentivize people to fill in the survey. So that's there for a reason, because people are kind of overloaded with these things. So yes, there is value. What you're getting at is regular checking in, and that's the key thing. So more than surveys, there are other ways you can regularly check in, like the midpoint review. So the midpoint review is a check-in. Now, I love when I can do those face-to-face, but you could do those as a webinar. You could have information webinars, so topics that are useful to your participants, but as part of that, you give them the opportunity, or you ask them for their input by, say, running a poll. I recently had a couple of clients where I ran for each of them a series of webinars that were content-rich webinars. But during those webinars, I asked questions. So the polls that you've completed today, you can design polls in your webinars that say, okay, and I did with one of them. I said, okay, how many of you have, the poll was, how many of you have met with your mentor at least 3 times? 3 to 6 times, 2 to 3 times, 1 time, not at all. So it's a survey, but it's one they're doing in the moment. Again, beware the small sample, but at least it gives you that feedback. Hope that's helpful with your question there, Cheryl. We're coming to the end of our time, so let me just summarise. Keep the questions coming in. I will stick around at the end and answer any questions that you have. I just wanted to say in conclusion, my view is you need a clear plan that identifies the different groups and the what, when, where, and how you'll communicate with them. It's useful to remember that effective communication is always two-way. So I have something I call the Mentors Credo that I think is applicable to us to remember as well. And it's ask before you tell. So if you want to go out and sell mentoring to other people, you need to ask them and have conversations with them where you find out what are their concerns, what are their needs and wants. And then you listen, and listen before you speak. And you want to communicate before during and after. You want to follow up regularly and check for understanding. So in this webinar, we've talked about who you need to communicate to and why, what messages you want to get across, and I've spoken in general terms. Your homework is to take this generic model and to get your whiteboard and your colleagues together, and also I've talked about how to ensure the right messages are achieved. I'm seeing some questions coming in, going to come to those in a minute. In fact, I'm going to ask you to pause as we're coming up to nearly the end of time to consider what your key takeaways and your actions are going to be as a result. So please type those in as well as any questions you have. And I'm going to come back and respond to those in a minute. Before we do finish up though, and I go back to those questions, just letting you know our next webinar is on the 5th of September, and it's how to get good matches. So having gone out there and communicated, recruited your participants, the next stage obviously is going to be to match them. And I'll be sharing with you 3 strategies for matching. I'll talk about the pros and cons of each of those different strategies. Provide a checklist of matching criteria. Again, I present you with a generic. You go away and tailor that to your specific program. And I'll also talk about the important early stage and how you need to manage that so people get off to a good start, and what to do if it doesn't. I also wanted to just let you know that if you enjoy webinars, I can actually tailor webinars specifically for you. I can customize webinars for you, and I've done this for many of my clients now. Typically, there are 4 main areas that the content is tailored to you, and content around, and you can have a one-off webinar or a series. This is the series that I've run for several very satisfied clients now. Firstly, how mentoring works, where I provide a framework for effective mentoring. Then talking to mentors and mentorees about where to start, to how to develop and maintain their mentoring relationships. Naturally, we need to talk about the essential skills. Mentoring is a unique kind of conversation, so they need to have specific skills for that. And the 4th in the series is the art of feedback. I often call feedback mentoring in the moment, so that ability to give and receive feedback. So just drop me a line. You can type in the question box, or in fact send me an email if you'd like to talk some more about how I could customize webinars for you. But right now, we are coming up to time. I'm going to stick around for as long as it takes to hear your key takeaways, your actions, and respond to your questions. So, okay, Cheryl saying thanks. This has been very helpful. Thank you, Cheryl. You're most welcome. Another question from Chitra Lakela. No, I've got that wrong. Chitra Lekha. In India, forgive me for my terrible pronunciation of your name. How do you deal with mentors leaving the organisation in the mentoring initiative, in the middle of a mentoring initiative? A couple of 2 or 3 things that you can do. The first one is in your preparation. So what you need to do is have a pool of mentors and have more mentors than you need. You need to manage that with some sensitivity. So mentors that you don't match need to be kept in the loop. You need to look after them, keep them involved so that they can in fact step in. You can introduce them to the mentorees, and if you do have any group activities or any webinars, make a point of acknowledging the mentors that are participating without mentees, so that they feel like they're part of the group and part of the cohort. So you've got people ready to step in. The other thing is you will need to kind of facilitate that transition to a new mentor. And indeed, I've seen lots of situations where a person leaving the organisation doesn't necessarily signal the end of the mentoring program. So quite often, and whilst the mentor may not be able to attend functions, or they might be, depending on how cooperative their next employer is and how far away they are, they might be able to continue in the program. Certainly, they may be able to continue the relationship, albeit informally. So, 2 or 3 things you can do there. Thanks for the question. It's one you do need to be prepared for. So thanks for asking that. So Christine, you're welcome. Okay, just looking to see if there are any more questions or comments coming in. Most people are still on the line. Oh, I see Cedric there from New Zealand. Thanks for being with us again. Any comments or questions you have? Cedric has a lot of expertise in this area. You're welcome. Okay, so see you on the 5th, Liesl. Yes. Okay, so we have a key takeaway. Don't forget your key takeaways and your action. And they say information is power, but in fact, it's what you do with information that's really powerful. So key takeaway, how to get the buy-in from decision makers. Yes, and a lot of you said that that's what you needed to do. So some good takeaways there. Okay, any other key takeaways, questions, observations? Okay. Well, thank you for joining me. I will stick around a little longer if you're still typing in a question. I will stop the recording now, so thank you for joining me. If you're listening to this on a recording, remember you can email me at any time if you have a question. I'm going to stop the recording now and thank you for participating.